Let's be honest, most 3D models you drop into After Effects look, well, kind of flat. In this tutorial, I'll show you how to make them look cinematic. We'll match colors using image-based lighting, work around non-reflective surfaces color matching, and then add all the goodies: depth of field, motion blur, bokeh, and even some slick camera cuts. By the end, your 3D won't just sit there, it will look like it belongs in a movie. To show off all this madness, I'll use this comp that I've built ahead of time. The free models, including everything I'm using and referencing, are linked just below those magical like and subscribe buttons. And yes, I know it's cheesy to ask before delivering, but YouTube tells me that over 85% of you are still haven't subscribed, which is wild because it's free and it gives me the fuel that I need to keep making more tutorials. Anyway, shameless plug is over, let's dive in. Before I'll review the comp, I just want to mention that I'm using the beta version due to its ability to cast shadows from parallel and spotlight. It's also rendering much faster. We are going to use environmental light in order to match the colors using image-based lighting, IBL, but just to make it more realistic, I'm going to use the shadows from the spotlights that I'm going to add. Actually, just one spotlight. All right, so let me show you how I've built it. Basically, we have 4 different angles, so 4 different cameras. All are being controlled using this camera orbit null, so it helps us to create a continuous motion. Now we have 3 heroes here. Actually, the Jeep is the hero and probably the title. And underneath, I have this rock terrain model. Now, in some cases, it is being duplicated because when I'm looking at it from this angle, I actually need to see a bit more of the terrain. Let me just show you what I mean. I'm going to switch off those instances, and you see that the model basically ends here. To show you a different angle, I'll click on this pop-up menu and choose Custom View 1. And in order to fill those details, I'm duplicating the same model and just rotating it to a different place. So I'm doing it only for those 2 angles, which needed a little bit more attention. Now, I also switched on the shy icon because I actually don't need to look at them. So I'm going to enable the shy guy here, just to make things a little bit more simple. I've animated the monster Jeep to jump across those cliffs. And if I'm going to look back from the active camera view, and by the way, pressing escape is going to toggle me to the active camera, and the active camera is the topmost camera. So in our case, camera number 3. If I'll place another camera above it, this is going to be the active camera. Now, I'm parked over here because I just want to call your attention to the fact that I'm using this shape layer. This is a 2D layer to crop the image, and some of the elements, specifically the Master Jeep, is jumping above this. So it goes outside of the frame just to give it a little bit more of an interesting look. And the way to achieve it is just to sandwich a 2D layer, and this is just a simple shape as I told you. And the reason that I have another Jeep above it is because this one, the original one, needs to cast shadows. So the moment that I'll add a 2D layer, I'm breaking the 3D order, the 3D bin, as you can see over here. And this is the reason why I needed another Jeep. If I'll switch it off, you'll see how this looks. This 2D layer is cropping the entire thing. And then by using another instance, we have the ability to take it outside of the frame, which I think gives it a little nice touch. But again, everything is looking very flat. This is just the default light of After Effects. I'm going to park over here. And if you want to exaggerate it, let's say that you really want a 3D flat look, then there is a trick to achieve it using an ambient light. So I'll make sure nothing is selected. Then I'll go to Layer, New, and add a new light. I'll choose Ambient Light, make sure the intensity is 100%, and I'll click OK. And this is going to take away all the shading from the models. Now, it will work best with basically synthetic elements. So the background here, the rock terrain, doesn't really play nice with it. So if I'll switch all of those layers off, we have something that looks interesting. Now, to speed things up, I'll switch to Draft 3D, so we'll have a faster response when we are designing the scene, and when we're ready to render, we'll switch Draft 3D off. And of course, if I'll change the color of this ambient light, and you need to be very gentle here, the scene is going to respond accordingly. All right, I don't need this. This was just for the sake of demonstration, and I will bring back all the other layers as well as switch on the Shy Guy. Now, let's try to art direct lights and shadows so we'll have exactly what we want and then give it our own touch for a cinematic look. So for that, I'll go to where I can see the text here. Let's start with the text. And I'll create a few point lights just to art direct the way the extruded text looks. So I'm using a keyboard shortcut right now. So Command, Option, Shift L will bring back the new light setting dialog. I'll switch to point light in this case, and I'll click OK. So this point light is going to be in an arbitrary place. And because I want it to light the text, I'll hold Shift and use the parent peak whip and parent it to the game over, basically the text layer. And this is going to align it to the anchor point of the layer. Now, if I'm going to move it up and maybe also over here, I can create something that looks a little bit more interesting. So let's try some numbers that I know will work here. 500 for the X position, 100 for the Y, and then 500 again for the Z, just to place it more or less in the center of those letters. Now, what we can do here, we can duplicate this light, and then we can move it to another place. Maybe over here. And then of course we can also change the colors. So maybe a bright cyan color just to make it a bit more cooler for this light. I'll duplicate this point light. I'll move it over here to another area. And maybe for this one, I'll change the color to something a bit more warmer, something like this. Which is cool, but still everything is very dark, and this is because we are missing our key light, which is going to be a spotlight. And just to remind you, because I'm using the beta version, I can also cast shadows from this light. So I'm going to create a new light and choose a spotlight. I'll leave all the settings as they are and click OK. Now here's the trick. I want to make sure this light is just above the monster Jeep. So I'll go to the middle of the scene where I can see the Jeep in its full glory. Then I'll hold down Shift and I'll parent the light to the monster Jeep. And this is just going to align both of their axes, their anchor point. Now, if I want to leave the light over here, I can unparent it by pressing Command and clicking on the parent and link peak whip. And now I can change the orientation. So the X orientation, I'll hold down Shift, so it will snap to 5 degrees. So I'm actually after 270 degrees in the orientation. And now I'll need to make sure that I'll push the light above everything. To help me with this, I'll press Escape. This is going to toggle again the custom view one. And then I'll drag the light so it will be just somewhere over here, very tall in the sky. Now I'll press Escape again to toggle back the active camera view. And let's modify the light intensity. I think it needs to be a bit more stronger, so maybe 200%. Which is looking good, but there is a problem. It's also affecting all the other environmental thing here. So I don't want it to affect the rocks here. And we can modify it by changing the fall off. So you have two options. You can go with smooth, which will allow you to control the radius and fall off distance independently. Or in this case, a better workflow will be to choose the inverse square clamped, which will allow us to set very high values for the radius as much as we need them and still going to render the most realistic light fall-off effect. So I'm not sure how much I need to go here. I'll hold down Shift and I'll start to drag it until it looks okay without affecting, of course, the environment. So maybe something like this. I need to look at it from a different angle to see. And I also want to have a look at the shadows. Now, Now, the reason that I can't see the shadows, and this is depending on your hardware configuration, is because Draft 3D is enabled. But the moment I'll check it off, we should be able to see some shadows that the Jeep is casting on top of the letters. And we can also play with the shadow diffusion. Let's set it to maybe 50% to make those shadows a bit softer. It will take a little bit more time to render. And by the way, you can control the quality of the shadow by going to the render quality and change this value. So you don't need to worry about the environment light shadows because we are not using environment light to cast shadows, only this option. I'll leave it at 12 for now because I just want it to be fast while I'm working. But I also want to make sure that when I'm, let's say over here, I'm just going to drag the timeline to the place that the Jeep is above the ground, I can also see some shadows. And if I can't, I may need to tweak the radius settings here. So I'll try to raise this value maybe higher and try to find a good compromise until I see both shadows on the rocks here as well as on the title. So maybe this is too much. Let's split the difference and set it to 5500 and see how this looks. And you can also, of course, play with the cone feather to feather the light appearance. So maybe set it to 100% and just verify that everything looks good. And I think this is the sweet spot for this scene. I'll move again just above the text so I can see how the shadows are rendering on top of the text. And I think this looks amazing. And now I want to introduce an environment light for image-based lighting. So we're going to use the environment light quality in order to match the colors between the different elements in the scene by referencing another layer. So to speed things up, I'm going to return to Draft 3D, and just to be on the safe side, I'll grab all of my lights and drop them underneath this crop layer, and I'm doing it to make sure I'm not breaking the 3D bin render order. Alright, I'll make sure nothing is selected by pressing Command-Shift-A, then I'll select the spotlight, and now I'll return to the new light dialog to create a new light. I'll choose an environment light. Make sure to not cast shadows unless you want to bring your computer down on its knees. And since the spotlight is selected, when I'll click OK, the environment light is going to be created above whatever was selected. And this obviously will brighten the entire comp, so we may need to go back and modify the settings later. But now let's concentrate on relighting everything the same way. Basically modifying the colors using a texture. So I'll open up the sources folder and I have a few layers here. Some of them are EXR, some of them are HDR. Those are courtesy of Polyhaven. Again, links are down below. But I also have some regular images, a PNG image and a JPEG image, and I can actually use everything. It doesn't need to be a 360-degree HDR image anymore. So I'll select all of those layers and I'll drop them above everything in the timeline and I'll switch off the visibility. I'm just going to reference those layers, which means that I can also turn on the shy icon for them because I don't need to actually see them when I'm working. I'll now reselect the environment light, and in the properties panel, I can use the pop-up menu for the source and select any 2D layer which is available in this composition. Let's start with this big logs.exr. And just in case you want to see the layer independently, you can double click on it. It will open up in the footage monitor so you can have a look at what we are referencing here. Now, if you want, you can use the layer transformation here to change the X and Y rotation. So click and start to drag in order to see how this light is mapped on the other layers. And if this is too much light, well, we can tone down the intensity. Maybe set it to 60%. Or if we want, we can set it to a higher value. So just to make sure this is not competing with our spotlight, I'll return back to the spotlight and maybe reduce its intensity until I see back all the details in the ground here in the rocks. And now I can return back to this environment layer and check other environmental options. So let's check this rock of Cashel. This is a castle in Ireland. Let me show it to you here in this little preview. And again, feel free to move the X and Y rotation until you're satisfied. Also, check it in other places, for example, in the beginning and maybe also at the end, just to see how this works. Now, this is really fun, and it's up to you to choose which one you want to use. So you can see this one colors everything red. This one is probably going to do the blue treatment due to the cloudy sky. And I also have some sunset look. But the background terrain doesn't have any effect. And this is because it doesn't have any reflective surface, meaning nothing is bouncing back the light. So if we want to tint it as well, here is a workaround. I'll make sure nothing is selected and I'll add an adjustment layer above everything, and I'll name this adjustment Color Link. I'll go to Effect, Color Correction, and add the Color Link effect. And this effect will allow us to match the colors based on a reference layer. So it will take an average of the layer that we are referencing. In other words, I need to match it to whatever I'm choosing over here. So if I want the sunset look, I'll return to the color link option. And then for the source layer, I'll reference the same layer, the sunset.hdr. And now I can also play with the blending mode. So I think a good starting point will be the overlay blending mode. And then we can change the opacity, maybe go with 60%. And this is going to match also the environment to the layer. Now, again, we may not be able to see it when we are using Draft 3D. So let's switch off Draft 3D and let After Effects cache all the information, render at least one frame. And obviously now we can see that we are matching also the environment. Let's have another try. I'll return back to the environment light, and then I'll switch it to maybe the gym entrance, which has a very vivid red characters. Let me just show it to you over here. And now return to the color link adjustment layer and select the same layer, the gym entrance, to be used on top of everything, including, of course, the background. Now, if this is too much, you can, of course, lower the opacity until you feel that this is making sense. This is more realistic. So let's check it over here and see how this looks. Very good, but very sharp. Not too cinematic, to my opinion. So let me show you at the last part of this tutorial how to make it better and really more natural. So I think that what I'll do first is return back to the environment layer, and I'll switch it to one of the neutral backgrounds, so the big logs, I suppose. And then return back to the color link. And remember, I need to also change it over here and play with the opacity. Maybe this one wants to be a bit more stronger. You can also try different blending modes. So maybe check multiply to see how this works on the background. Too dark, to my opinion. So I'll leave it at overlay. And let's have a look at the end frame. And maybe also at the start. Just verify in few strategic places that it looks good. But I want to make it look even better, and I'll do it using a few post effects, and most of them will be third-party tools, which means you need to pay for them. Now, there are links down below to the tools that I'm using. I'm not affiliated by them, so it's totally up to you to choose what you want. Go ahead and try them before you buy. But here is my personal workflow, which starts with creating a depth map to create a nice bokeh effect, a depth of field effect. So to do it, I'll drag the comp that we worked on to the Make New Comp button to create a new comp out of it. And I'll rename the second copy with a very dangerous suffix, final. Now, to this copy, I'm going to apply the BCC Plus Depth Map effect. There are plenty of other third-party plugins that do pretty much the same job. For example, Depth Scanner and Quick Depth There's also, as I've heard, a brand new one coming from Maxon soon, so, make sure to test it as well. But I'm sticking with the BCC Plus Depth Map ML from Boris Effect, which on my setup was the most reliable and still is the most stable. Plus, it uses AI or machine learning, so who knows, maybe that makes this tutorial more popular or less. We'll find out together. Either way, the workflow is similar no matter which plugin you choose, so let's dive in. Instead of talking about it, let me show you how to work it out. So I'll open up the BCC Blur category, I think. No, it is actually the BCC Key and Blend, and here it is. I'll double click in order to apply it to the entire composition, and after a few moments, if we'll go to the middle of the comp, we're going to see the result. It's basically going to look at the elements inside and create some sort of a depth map for us that we can use. So the way to use it is to duplicate another version. This one doesn't need to have the blur map effect. And on this version, I'll use a camera lens blur effect. Now, as before, you've got few options here. There is the built-in effect under blur and sharpen. This is the camera lens blur. So you can definitely use this one. And then for the blur map, just make sure to reference the layer with the effect. So in this case, just to make it easy to identify, I'll name this one depth map. This means that I know that I'm choosing the correct layer. And I need to include, of course, effects and masks. And then I can make the blur radius higher or smaller. Now, the built-in one in After Effects, again, it's not terrible, but it often creates weird edges artifacts on the alpha channel edges. So you're better off investing in a third-party option like Frischluft Lensker, or my personal favorite, Fast Bokeh Pro from Rowbyte, which you can of course get at AE Scripts as well. It's faster, cleaner, and much more affordable. So I'll open up the Rowbyte category and I'll apply the Fast Bokeh instead of the camera lens blur. And the setup is the same. So I'm going to define the depth map layer as the depth map, including the effects and masks. And then I can change the blur radius. Let's go with 8 or 10, just to match what we had before. And in this case, I also think that we need to invert the depth map. So I'll check the invert checkbox and maybe also play with the focus distance, or if you have access to the Pro, so this effect also has a free version, but the Pro can give you a focus point. So you can just use this target and click on where you want it to be in full focus. And you can see the result now is much better. And you can see how this works. I'll just move it to another area. And when the Jeep arrives from the distance, it's going to be a bit more blurred. All right, looks great. And now we need to add some motion blur. And again, you have a few options. If you're patient and don't mind waiting forever, the built-in CC Force Motion Blur, which you can find under the time category. This guy is over here. I'll close the other ones so we won't get confused by them. This is great, but it will take a lot of time to render. But if you prefer speed and you don't mind paying for it, and I promise it will pay for itself the first time you use it, then my recommendation is to go with the Revision Real Smart Motion Blur, which is practically the industry standard. You can also use the relatively new one from BCC, the Motion Blur ML, which again gives great results and very fast to render. And here's how to do it. So I'll create another adjustment layer. I'll name it MB for Motion Blur. And just to show you the difference in terms of speed, I'll apply the built-in CC Force Motion Blur. And I'm actually getting an error here, so apparently I can't use it. Let's just remove it and try with the Real Smart Motion Blur and see how this works. And obviously you can see it's already finished to calculate. So this is so much faster. And finally, let's add some film grain. For this, I'm using the built-in add grain effect, which got a huge speed boost in recent versions of After Effects. It renders much faster now and gives your 3D that subtle cinematic texture that we all love. So I'll duplicate this adjustment layer, I'll name it grain, I'll remove the Real Smart Motion Blur effect, and then I'll go to noise and grain and add the first one. I'll change the viewing mode from preview to final output. And I'm a big fan of this Kodak Vision 200T preset, so I might as well choose it and maybe raise the intensity to 1.5. Now, this used to be a really slow one to render, but in recent version, it actually renders really nice and fast. And I'm just going to zoom in so you can see how this looks. If you don't want color noise, go ahead and change it to monochromatic to make it a little bit less dramatic, and hopefully you can see it through the YouTube compression. And finally, to top things off, I'll add a CC vignette effect. So I'll add it to the same grain layer, and I'll make sure to change the pin highlight to 100% just to keep those nice vivid colors at the edge of the frame. And this is going to add a subtle effect, but I think, you must add vignette to every cinematic creation. So you can see I'm turning it on and off, and this is its contribution. And that's it. I can now maximize the viewer, and we can process the comp. Now, if you want to change the atmosphere, you just need to swap another HDR, EXR, or even a still image or a video as the light source for the environment light. And don't forget to reference the same layer in the color link adjustment layer, so the rock terrain model or whatever you are using, which is not a reflective model, can enjoy the exact same treatment. This is what I did here, and you see my 4 different results are very consistent and cinematic. So, is this better than proper 3D program? Of course not. But the fact that we can pull it off inside After Effects with render times around 7 minutes per comp makes this workflow worth keeping in your back pocket. Now, I want to hear from you. Will you actually use this trick or tricks, or do you think it's just rubbish and beneath your high standards? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more free tutorials. Can you argue with that? Or maybe you can, we'll see.